Hi guys, welcome back to K-Drama Addicts.
The thing about Seoul in October was that it never warned you before it turned cold. One morning you were walking through Itaewon in a light jacket, sweating faintly under the afternoon sun, and the next you were pulling your coat tight against a wind that came down from the Han River like it had a personal grievance. Zara Campbell had learned this in her first year. Now, in her third, she kept an extra cardigan folded beneath the counter of her stall and a flask of ginger tea tucked beside the propane tank like it was sacred. Her stall was called Yard Vibes, a name that made every Jamaican who stumbled into Itaewon stop dead in their tracks, read it twice, and then break into the kind of smile that only happens when you find something from home in a place that has no business having it. The sign was hand-painted in yellow, green, and black, slightly uneven because Zara had painted it herself the night before opening. Kneeling on the floor of the small kitchen she and Kwame rented in Mapo, brush in one hand, rum punch in the other. That was 2 years ago. She still looked at that sign every morning and felt the same flutter in her chest. Part pride, part terror, part something she couldn't name yet. She made jerk chicken that people took photos of. She made rice and peas so fragrant that the Korean vendor 3 stalls down, a stocky man named Mr. Beck who sold tteokbokki and had never in his 60 years expressed admiration for anything, once walked over mid-service, stood silently for a moment and said, "What is that?" She made festival dumplings and fried plantain and a Scotch bonnet sauce so dangerously good that she'd had 3 grown Korean men tear up at the table. Not from pain but from something deeper, the shock of a flavor you didn't know you'd been missing. This was what Zara had come to Seoul for. Not the food stall exactly, that had been improvised, born from desperation and creativity when the culinary scholarship she'd chased fell through in the second round. She had come for the Seoul International Culinary Arts Program, a 2-year scholarship offered to promising young chefs from developing nations, full funding, and a guaranteed externship at one of 3 Michelin-starred restaurants in the city. She had applied at 22, been shortlisted, flown to Seoul for the final interview, been told she was extraordinary but not quite ready. And then, because the flight home was already paid for the next morning and she had nowhere else to be, she had met Kwame Ashanti in a 24-hour pajamaka near Hongik University, both of them nursing soju they couldn't really afford and laughing at the absurdity of 2 Jamaicans ending up heartbroken in Seoul on the same rainy Thursday. Kwame had come for different reasons. He had a cousin who'd opened an auto workshop in Itaewon 5 years earlier, made good money, and called home every Christmas talking about Seoul like it was a golden city sitting just past the clouds. Kwame had believed him. He was 28 then, a mechanic since 16, good with his hands in the way that some people are good with words, instinctively, almost without thinking. He had flown over with 1 bag and big plans. 3 years later, the cousin had returned to Kingston due to a family emergency and left Kwame the lease on the workshop. That was how Kwame became the only Jamaican mechanic in Mapogu, possibly in all of Seoul, a distinction he wore with enormous pride. They had married quietly at the Seoul Immigration Office 18 months after that pajamaka night, 2 witnesses, Hyun-suk and a Ghanaian nurse named Abina, standing in the fluorescent light of a government building while a clerk processed their paperwork with the enthusiasm of someone filing tax returns. It had not been romantic. Zara had worn a yellow dress and Kwame had cried, which had made her cry, and Hyun-suk had taken 17 photos on his phone and managed to get his own thumb in 14 of them. For a while, everything had been good. The cracks were small at first. Kwame would ask who she'd been talking to at the stall. She'd say, "A customer," and he'd say, "Which customer?" and she'd say, "Kwame, it was a customer." He wasn't aggressive. He never raised his hand, never raised his voice past a certain temperature. But there was something in the way he watched her. A tightness behind his eyes when men lingered too long at the counter, a particular silence when she came home later than expected, a way of going very still when she laughed too freely at something another man had said. It was not violence. It was the steady pressure of a hand around something fragile, not squeezing, just holding, always holding. Do Hyun-suk, who had worked at Kwame's shop since the beginning and had appointed himself the marriage's unofficial therapist despite having been single for 6 consecutive years, told Kwame plainly one evening over samgyeopsal and 2 rounds of beer, "Brother, jealousy doesn't protect love. It just teaches the person you love how to hide things from you." Kwame had laughed and changed the subject. He was good at that. It was on a wet Tuesday in October, the kind of day where the rain came sideways and the streets of Itaewon emptied of tourists and filled instead with the ordinary people who actually lived there, that Zara first encountered Ryu Jinho. She hadn't seen the car. She had been pushing her supply cart across the junction outside the market, loaded with Scotch bonnet peppers, allspice, 2 whole chickens in a cooler bag, and a bunch of thyme so fragrant it was turning heads. She stepped off the curb. The car, a black Genesis, spotless, silent the way only very expensive things are silent, came around the corner and stopped 3 inches from her cart. The cooler bag slid. One of the chickens nearly made its escape onto the road. Zara stood there in the rain. She looked at the car. The window came down. The man behind the wheel looked at her, with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Not alarm exactly, not apology. More like the mild inconvenience of a man whose morning has been briefly disrupted. He was Korean, somewhere in his mid-30s, with a face that was composed in the specific way of someone who had trained themselves never to be caught off guard. He wore a dark suit. His hands on the steering wheel were very still. "Are you hurt?" he said. His Korean was careful and low. "No," she said in Korean, because 3 years in Seoul had done that much for her at least. He looked at her for a moment longer than felt polite. Then the window went up. The car moved past her. She stood in the rain watching its taillights disappear around the corner and felt, inexplicably, like something had just shifted slightly, like a painting hung fractionally crooked that you don't notice until one day, suddenly, you do. She told Kwame about it that evening, laughing, while she seasoned the chicken for the next day. "Near miss with a Genesis," she said. "Fancy car, rude driver." Kwame laughed too and told her to look both ways, which she said she always did, which wasn't entirely true. They went to bed that night easy and warm, his arm across her waist, the apartment smelling of thyme and allspice, rain still falling against the window. She would remember that night later, remember how ordinary it was, remember that she had no idea. 3 weeks passed before she saw him again. He came to the stall on a Friday evening, when Itaewon was doing what Itaewon did on Fridays, filling itself with noise and neon and the overlapping languages of a dozen countries. He was dressed differently this time, no suit, a dark coat, standing at the end of her queue with no phone in his hand, which was unusual because everyone in Seoul had a phone in their hand always, as if they feared what might happen to their hands if left unoccupied. He ordered in Korean, jerk chicken, rice, plantain. He paid exactly, no rounding. He stood to the side and ate standing up slowly, with the focus of someone who takes food seriously. Zara watched him between orders without meaning to. When he finished, he set the container down, looked at the stall sign, Yard Vibes, and then at her. "This is Jamaican food," he said. "Yes," she said. "You're Jamaican." "Also yes." He considered this. "It's good," he said, in the flat tone of someone stating a fact rather than offering a compliment. Then he left. She didn't think much of it. Itaewon got interesting people. That was its whole personality. He came back the following Friday. And the one after that. He always ordered the same thing. He always paid exactly. He never lingered past the time it took to eat. He gave his name as Park Sung-min when she started a loyalty card system, and she wrote it down without suspicion because Park Sung-min was approximately the most common name in Korea. Like saying his name was John Smith and expecting no one to blink. It was Mr. Beck who first said something. He came over one quiet afternoon, ostensibly to ask if she had extra napkins, and nodded in the direction of the empty space where the man in the dark coat usually stood. "That man who comes every Friday," Mr. Beck said. "Customer," Zara said. Mr. Beck made a sound. "You know who his family is?" She didn't. He told her to search Ryu Group, Seoul. She did it that night, sitting on the edge of the bed while Kwame showered, and the results came up before she'd finished typing. Real estate, construction, 3 subsidiaries with unspecified portfolios. A patriarch who had died in 2019 under circumstances that news articles described with careful vagueness. And 1 heir, Ryu Jin-ho, 35, photographed at galas and government functions, always in dark suits, always with that same expression of a man who has never once been surprised by anything the world offered him. She put her phone down. She looked at the shower door, steam curling underneath it. She did not tell Kwame. The gifts started in November. The first one arrived at the stall on a morning Zara was alone. Before opening, prepping her marinade with her earphones in and a coffee album filling the small canvas tent with something that felt like Kingston. A courier appeared at the entrance, young, uniformed, carrying a slim rectangular box with no sender name. Inside, A silk scarf, deep burgundy, the kind of quality that you could feel was serious before you even fully unfolded it. The card said only, "For the cold mornings." No signature. She held it for a long time. Her first instinct was to throw it away. Her second was to put it on because it was beautiful and because the mornings had in fact turned genuinely brutal. She compromised by putting it in the supply cabinet under the counter and not thinking about it, which was not the same as actually not thinking about it. The second gift came a week later. A bottle of Appleton Estate rum, the good kind, the kind you couldn't easily find in Seoul, which meant someone had either imported it specifically or had connections in the kind of circles that could source anything. With it, a small folded note. "In case you miss home." Still no name. But she knew. She had always known from the first one, if she was being honest with herself, which she was trying very hard not to be. She confronted him on his next Friday visit. She waited until he had paid and stepped to the side, then walked around the counter and stood beside him, which seemed to mildly surprise him. Not that his face showed it much, but there was the faintest recalibration, a slight shift in his stillness. "The scarf," she said. "And the rum." "Stop." He looked at her. "Did you like them?" "That is not the answer to what I said." "You said stop. I'm asking whether you liked them first." "Ryu Jin-ho," she said, and watched something move very briefly across his face at the sound of his real name from her mouth. "I am married. I am not interested. And I know enough about your family to know that I should be saying this very clearly and only once." He was quiet for a moment. Around them the Friday evening noise of Itaewon carried on as if nothing important was happening here. As if the small conversation between a Jamaican woman with flour on her apron and a Korean crime heir was not the beginning of something that would rearrange several people's lives. "Noted," he said finally. He left. She went back behind the counter. Her hands were steady. She was proud of her hands for that. He did not stop. The third gift arrived at the stall. The fourth was delivered to her apartment building, which meant he knew where she lived, which was a different category of thing entirely. The fifth was a basket of Scotch bonnet peppers, fresh, Caribbean grade, the kind that couldn't be found in any Korean supermarket. She stood in the stall looking at that basket for a long time because it was so specifically her. Not jewelry, not flowers, but the exact ingredient she was always struggling to source, and she felt simultaneously furious and unsettled by how carefully he had been watching. She made the mistake of leaving the basket on the counter. Kwame stopped by that afternoon. He saw the basket. He read the note, which said only for the recipe you told me about, a reference to a conversation she'd had with Jin-ho about her grandmother's pepper sauce that she had not mentioned to Kwame because it had felt like nothing at the time, and the temperature in the stall dropped in a way that had nothing to do with October. "Who sent this?" Kwame said. "Not a question." "A customer," she said, which was true and also deeply inadequate. "Which customer sends you imported pepper and knows about your grandmother's recipe?" She didn't answer. Not because she was hiding anything. Nothing had happened, nothing was happening. But because she knew that the truth, spoken plainly, would not land as plainly as she meant it. The truth was, "A man I told you about, the one from the car, has been coming to the stall and I didn't mention how often because I knew how you'd react and look, here we are, I was right." That truth would sound, to Kwame's ears, like a confession. And she was tired, deeply, quietly tired, of having to pre-translate her own honesty to account for his fear. The argument that followed was not the worst they'd ever had. It was something more wearing than that, circular, airless, the kind of fight that doesn't have a climax, just a long mutual erosion. He didn't accuse her of anything specific. He asked questions that contained their own answers. She answered anyway, patiently and then less patiently and then with the flat effect of someone who has used up their patience and is now running on something colder. They went to bed without resolution, a careful foot of space between them, both staring at the ceiling. At 2 in the morning she heard him get up. She heard him sit in the kitchen. She heard nothing else, just the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of Seoul doing what Seoul does all night. Breathing, moving, never fully going quiet. She thought about the scholarship application. The deadline for the reapplication cycle was March. She had been quietly preparing her portfolio for 3 months, saying nothing, because she wasn't sure yet whether she was allowed to want that much again after the first time. She fell asleep thinking about her grandmother's kitchen in Kingston, the pepper sauce recipe, the way the morning light came through the louver windows and turned everything gold before the heat arrived. Home was a taste and a light and a smell all at once. She'd been trying to rebuild it in Seoul, stall by stall, recipe by recipe, one Jamaican flag sewed. Above a counter in Itaewon. She was still building it. She refused to stop. Meanwhile, in a glass and steel building in Gangnam that housed the Ryu Group's legitimate operations on the upper floors and its less documented activities in the architecture of its financial accounts, Ryu Jinho sat in a boardroom at 11 p.m. and listened to a report he had already read twice. The land in question was a 400 square meter plot in Itaewon's lower market district. The Ryu Group needed it. A rival syndicate needed it more, had been, in fact, quietly buying up adjacent lots for 8 months, which Jinho's people had missed until 3 weeks ago, which was the kind of oversight that didn't happen on Jinho's watch and had since generated a very uncomfortable series of internal conversations. The land had to be secured. The current occupants, a cluster of small vendors on informal short-term leases, would be bought out. Standard procedure. Except that one of the stalls was not on an informal lease. One of the stalls held a 2-year registered tenancy agreement, legally airtight, signed by one Zara Ashanti Nay Campbell, Jamaican national, valid through the following October. Breaking it without grounds would trigger legal exposure the group did not want, especially not while 3 of their subsidiaries were under a routine tax audit. Jinho had driven that Genesis through that junction every morning for 2 years. He had not noticed her until the Tuesday she nearly collided with his car. He had noticed her very clearly after that. Not in the way his legal team noticed a problem, but in the way that sometimes, when something unexpected enters your life, it reorganizes what was already there into a pattern you hadn't seen before. He was not, he told himself, a man who made decisions with that part of himself. He was also not, several weeks of Friday jerk chicken later, entirely convinced that was still true. Song Yuna found Zara on a Wednesday. She came to the stall in the early afternoon lull, dressed plainly, no makeup, with the particular energy of someone who has been working up to something for days. She asked for a cup of tea. Zara didn't technically serve tea, but she made it for her anyway, from the personal flask, because something in the woman's face asked for it. You know Ryu Jinho, Yuna said. Again, not a question. Zara looked at her over the counter. He's been to the stall. More than that. More than I wanted, Zara agreed. Yuna wrapped both hands around the cup. She was maybe 30, Zara thought, but something in her eyes had the quality of someone older, not aged, but compacted, like someone who had processed a great deal in a short time and was still working through the filing. He did this to me 2 years ago, Yuna said. Not the same, I wasn't married. We dated for 4 months. He was attentive in a way that felt like being under a microscope. He wanted to know everything. Where I was, who I was with, what I thought about things. At first it felt like being truly seen. Then I realized he wasn't seeing me. He was mapping me, learning how I worked so he could predict me. She paused. When I ended it, he didn't get angry. That would have been easier. He just didn't accept it. He called my employer. He called my sister. He sent things, not threatening things, just things that said, I know where you are. I know who you are. You cannot simply decide I don't exist. Zara was quiet. I'm not telling you this so you'll be afraid, Yuna said. I'm telling you because no one told me, and I spent 6 months thinking I was handling it and I wasn't. She set the cup down. He doesn't want what he wants because he wants it. He wants it because having things is how he understands power. You have something he's decided he wants. That is all it is. Has almost nothing to do with you. She left 30,000 won on the counter for the tea that had cost nothing and walked back into the Wednesday afternoon. Zara stood at her counter and watched the market move around her. The vendors, the delivery men, the Itaewon regulars who came at this hour when the tourists were elsewhere. She looked at the Yard Vibes sign with its uneven letters and its yellow-green-black paint. She thought, I am not going anywhere. She also thought, I need to be smarter than I've been. She took out her phone. She opened the voice recorder app. She did not close it. Kwame Ashanti was not a man who scared easily. He had grown up in a neighborhood in Kingston where fear was a luxury that got in the way of practical things, and he had moved to a foreign country where he didn't speak the language and built something from nothing, which required the kind of daily courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside but is exhausting from the inside. He was not easily intimidated. He had a large laugh and larger hands and the specific confidence of a man who knows exactly what he's good at. But when Ryu Jinho's assistant called the workshop on a Thursday morning and said that Mr. Ryu would like to meet with Mr. Ashanti privately, and named a restaurant in Abgujong that Kwame had to look up and then whistle softly at the prices of, Something cold moved through him that he chose to identify as irritation rather than its actual name. He went. He told Hyunsuk he had a supplier meeting. He took the subway and wore his good jacket and arrived 4 minutes early, which was as close to on time as he ever managed, and was shown to a private room at the back where Jinho was already seated with no food on the table and no phone in sight. They looked at each other. Kwame had imagined someone flashier. The kind of man his wife would notice. Loud in the way of money, a chain, a watch that announced itself. Jinho was none of that. He was very still and very composed, and when he spoke his Korean was slow and precise in a way that felt like courtesy toward Kwame's intermediate level, which was somehow more unsettling than condescension would have been. Your wife, Jinho said, runs a successful stall in Itaewon. She does, Kwame said. She's talented. I know. I've been to her stall several times. He said this without any particular weight, as if it were simply information being transferred. I respect what she's built. Kwame's jaw tightened. What do you want? Jinho reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table. White, thick, sealed. He set it down with the same efficiency with which he did everything, no drama, no extended pause for effect. 500 million won, he said, for a voluntary dissolution of your marriage. Proper legal channels. A settlement for both of you, which you would divide as you see fit. The room was very quiet. Kwame stared at the envelope. He was aware that 500 million won was, converted, an amount of money that could change the trajectory of a person's entire life. He was aware, on a separate and simultaneous level, that a man had just sat across from him and offered to purchase his wife, which was possibly the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to him, including moving to Korea. She's not for sale, Kwame said. I'm not buying her, Jinho said, with what appeared to be genuine semantic precision. I'm compensating you for... Don't finish that sentence, Kwame said, quietly. Silence. No, Kwame said. He stood. He did not touch the envelope. He put his jacket straight and looked at Jinho for a long moment. No. And if you come near my wife again. What? Jinho said. Not hostile. Just curious. Kwame had no good ending for that sentence. Not in a room in Apgujeong. Not with a man whose family's name showed up in contexts he'd been reading about since Wednesday. He left without finishing it, which felt like losing something, and took the subway home with his hands on his knees and his mind running very fast in several directions at once. He did not tell Zara. This was his catastrophic mistake. He told Hyunsuk instead that same evening, over the Samgyeopsal place near the workshop where they went when things needed to be processed through meat and soju. He told him everything. The restaurant, the room, the envelope, what was in it. Hyunsuk listened without interruption, which was unusual for Hyunsuk. When Kwame finished, he poured them both another shot and drank his before saying anything. Did you take the money? He asked. No. Good. Hyunsuk turned his cup in his hands. Tell Zara. I will. Tonight. Soon. Hyunsuk looked at him. Kwame, brother. If she finds out some other way. She won't. If she finds out some other way, Hyunsuk repeated, with the patience of a man who has watched his friend make preventable errors before. She will be angrier about the hiding than she ever would have been about the original thing. You understand that, right? Women, good women, women who love you, they can absorb a lot. What they cannot absorb is finding out that you looked at something that affected their entire life and decided it wasn't their business to know. Kwame looked at his cup. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment. He was good at telling himself things like that. Reasonable things, practical things, things that sounded like strategy but were, at the bottom, fear wearing strategy's coat. The right moment did not come, and then it stopped mattering whether it came or not, because 3 weeks after the Apgujeong meeting, a text message arrived on Hyunsuk's phone from a number he didn't recognize. A photo, grainy, of Kwame and Jinho sitting across from each other in that private room. No context. No words, just the image, forwarded without explanation, from someone inside the Ryu organization who had their own reasons for wanting the table turned. Hyunsuk sat with his phone for 40 minutes. Then he went to Yard Vibes. He arrived at the end of service, when Zara was breaking down the counter and the stall was emptying of its last customers and the Itaewon evening was settling into its louder nighttime self. He sat on one of the low stools. He ordered nothing. She looked at him and knew from his face immediately that something was happening. He showed her the photo. She looked at it for a long time. She looked at it the way you look at something you're waiting to change, waiting for it to become something else, something with an explanation that doesn't mean what you think it means. It didn't change. How long ago? She asked. 3 weeks, he said. She put the photo down carefully on the counter. She finished folding her apron. She unhooked the Yard Vibes sign from its cord and wrapped it in the cloth she kept for it. She did all of this with great precision, each motion deliberate, like someone who is keeping themselves very controlled because the alternative is not something she wants to do in public. What did he offer him? She asked. Hyun-suk told her. She nodded slowly. 500 million won, she said, almost to herself. He didn't take it, Hyun-suk said quickly. I want you to know that. He refused it immediately. I know he refused it, she said. That's not the point. I know, Hyun-suk said quietly. I know that. She picked up her bag. She looked at him. Thank you for telling me, she said, with a warmth that cost her something at that moment. Even though it wasn't your job to, he should have told me. She left the stall. She did not go home. She went to Yuna's apartment in Mapo, took the spare key from under the ceramic cat by the door that Yuna had shown her for exactly this kind of occasion, let herself in, sat on the floor of the living room with her back against the couch, and stayed there until Yuna came home at 11 and found her and put a blanket around her shoulders without asking anything. That night she texted Kwame one sentence. I know about Abgyujong. His reply came 4 minutes later. It was not an explanation. It was just, I'm sorry. She turned her phone over. She stared at the ceiling of Yuna's apartment and thought. She turned her phone over. She stared at the ceiling of Yuna's apartment and thought about the scholarship application sitting in a folder on her laptop. Thought about her grandmother's kitchen. Thought about the voice recorder app she'd been leaving open on her phone for 2 weeks. Catching conversations. Catching what people said when they didn't know they were being heard. Thought about the fact that nobody, not Kwame, not Jin Ho, not anyone, had ever asked her what she wanted, what she actually wanted. Not as a wife, not as a target, not as a possession someone was either protecting or pursuing. What Zara Campbell, 25 years old, from Kingston, Jamaica, currently residing in Seoul, Korea, with flour in her cuticles and a scholarship application 3 months from its deadline. What she wanted. She knew the answer. She had always known the answer. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow she would start. The Ryu Group's main offices occupied the 31st through 35th floors of a glass tower in Gangnam-gu with a lobby that had the cool, hushed quality of places designed to make you feel immediately that you do not belong there. The security desk was staffed by 2 men in suits who looked at people with the professional blankness of those who have been trained to assess threat without appearing to assess anything. The elevator banks were to the left. The waiting area, cream sofas, a single orchid on a glass table, was clearly designed for people who were expected and invited. Zara was neither. She had dressed carefully that morning. Not formally, she didn't own formal in the way this building meant it, but deliberately. Dark jeans, a structured jacket she'd bought secondhand in Hongdae that fit her well, and the burgundy scarf, the first gift, which she had decided to wear because it was warm and beautiful and she had decided that receiving a gift from someone did not mean they owned you, and she was done curating her choices around other people's interpretations. Her hair was up. She wore the small gold earrings Kwame had given her the Christmas before last, which she wore not out of loyalty at this moment but because they were the ones that stayed put when she moved fast. Her phone was in her breast pocket. The voice recorder had been running for 12 minutes. Her hands were steady. She had told no one she was coming here. Not Kwame, who had been calling since the night of the text. The call she had been listening to ring out while she sat in Yuna's kitchen eating toast and thinking. Not Hyun-suk, who had sent 3 messages in the last 2 days checking on her. Not Yuna, who had watched her get dressed that morning and said only, "You know what you're doing?" And Zara had said, "Yes." And Yuna had said, "Okay." And that had been the whole conversation, which was exactly what she'd needed. She approached the security desk and said, Ryu Jinho's name and her own name and the name of the stall in Itaewon, and asked them to pass the message. The man on the left picked up a phone. He was gone for 30 seconds. When he put it down, his expression had shifted by approximately 3%, which on a face that professionally showed nothing was equivalent to a raised eyebrow. 34th floor, he said. Mr. Ryu's assistant will meet you. She rode the elevator alone. The city appeared below her as the floors counted up. Seoul in November, gray-skied, enormous, intricate, a city of 11 million people who were all in the middle of their own lives, their own stories, their own small catastrophes and ordinary miracles. She had come here at 22 chasing a dream she hadn't been ready for yet. She was 25 now. She was ready. The doors opened. Jinho's office was at the end of a corridor. His assistant, a young woman who communicated through very controlled facial expressions, led her to a set of heavy wooden doors and knocked once, opened them and stepped aside. It was a large room, floor-to-ceiling windows on two sides, a desk that cost more than Zara's annual stall revenue. Jinho was standing when she entered, not sitting, which meant he had stood up when he heard her name, which meant something she filed away and ignored. He looked at her with the expression she had catalogued by now, that careful, composed assessment, the stillness. Then, almost imperceptibly, at the phone-shaped outline in her breast pocket. She watched him clock it, watched him decide not to address it. Interesting. Sit down, he said. I'll stand, she said. This won't be long. She took the phone out. She held it so the microphone faced forward. She pressed play. His own voice came out of the small speaker, clear and unhurried. 500 million won. For a voluntary dissolution of your marriage. Then Kwame's voice. She's not for sale. Then Jinho again. I'm not buying her. And then the recording ended where Kwame had cut him off. The room was very quiet. The orchid on the windowsill didn't move. The city outside continued its indifferent sprawl. I recorded other things too, she said. The Friday visits. Our conversations. The notes I wrote down after each gift with dates and descriptions. I have a folder. Yuna has a copy of the folder. My lawyer. She did not have a lawyer, but she said this as a solid fact and looked at him without blinking. Has a copy of the folder. He looked at her for a long time. This is all inadmissible, he said, not unkindly. I know, she said. I'm not going to court. I'm not going to the police. I'm not going to any journalist, though I thought about that one. She paused. I'm going to the Seoul Immigration Business Registration Office to renew my stall tenancy for 2 additional years, which I have the legal right to do as a registered business holder in good standing. And then I'm going to go back to my stall and make jerk chicken and apply for the culinary scholarship I came here for, and I am going to get it this time. And none of that is going to be disrupted by anyone. She held his gaze. You don't want me, she said. You not told me what you do. You want the land my stall is on. You want to clear those tenancies and you need mine gone cleanest because it's the only one that's legally registered. So you built this whole production. The gifts, the visits, the offer to Kwame. You thought if you destabilized my marriage I'd leave voluntarily, or he'd take the money and I'd have nowhere to go. She tilted her head slightly. Did I get that right? Something moved across his face. Not guilt. She didn't think guilt lived in him in any recognizable form, but something that might have been, in a different man, respect. You got some of it right, he said. I got enough of it right, she said. He was quiet for a moment. He walked to the window, not away from her, just to the window, and looked down at Gangnam with his hands behind his back. What do you want? He said. Not a negotiation. Just the question. I want you to leave me alone, she said. No more gifts. No more Friday visits to my stall. No action, legal or otherwise, against my tenancy for the remainder of its term. After that, if the group wants to make a legitimate offer for the land through proper commercial channels, that's between your lawyers and the market owner. I'll be gone by then. I'll have my scholarship. She put the phone back in her pocket. In return, this folder stays in a folder. He turned from the window. He looked at her for a long time. You came here alone, he said. Yes. No one knows you're here. Yuna knows I'm here, she said. She has instructions. This was actually true. He almost smiled. It was the first time she had seen his face do anything like that. Not a full smile, just the suggestion of one, there and gone. Agreed, he said. She nodded once. She picked up her bag from where she'd set it near the door. She walked out of the office, down the corridor, into the elevator, through the lobby, out of the glass tower into the Gangnam air, which was cold and gray and entirely normal, and she stood on the pavement for 30 seconds and breathed it in before hailing a cab back to Itaewon. The scholarship application had a section for a personal statement. She had started it 4 times and deleted it 4 times. Tonight, sitting in the small kitchen of the Mapo apartment, She had come back, not for Kwame exactly, but because it was her home too and she was done vacating her own life. She opened the document for the 5th time. She wrote, I came to Seoul at 22 believing that a culinary education would teach me how to cook. I know now that I already knew how to cook. What I needed to learn was how to stand in a foreign city and build something from scratch and defend it. I have been doing that for 3 years. I am ready now for the next part. She kept writing. She didn't delete it. Kwame was in the living room. He had been very quiet since she came back that evening. He had not asked where she'd been. He had made rice. Not well, rice was not his strength, and put a plate near her side of the kitchen and then retreated, which was, she thought, the right instinct. At 11 he appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked up. I should have told you, he said. Yes, she said. I was afraid of how it would sound. I know. She closed the laptop. Kwame, I need you to understand something. She said it carefully, not with anger anymore. The anger had done its work and moved through her, and what was left was something quieter and more serious. I am not a thing that needs guarding. I am not something you protect by keeping information from. When you don't tell me things because you're afraid of your own insecurity, you're not protecting me. You're protecting yourself. And that leaves me alone in the middle of something I should have known about from the start. He was very still in the doorway. I love you, she said. That hasn't changed. But I need you to be different than you've been. Not different in 10 years. Now, therapy, actual work. I am not going to keep translating my own honesty so it fits inside your fear. He looked at the floor, then at her. His jaw was tight, the way it got when he was working something out, the way it had looked that night in the Pojangmaka in Hongik when they'd first talked, two strangers working out whether the world was survivable. Okay, he said. Okay, you're saying it, or okay, you mean it. A long pause. Both, he said. I'll find someone. A therapist. Hyun-suk's been telling me for 2 years. Hyun-suk is smarter than both of us combined, she said. Something shifted in the kitchen. Not fixed, nothing was fixed yet, and she wasn't pretending otherwise. But something shifted, like a window opened. She turned the laptop back open. I'm finishing this application, she said. Don't wait up. He went to bed. She wrote until 2 a.m., and this time she didn't delete any of it. 2 months later, in January, a letter arrived from the Seoul International Culinary Arts Program. She opened it standing at the kitchen counter, still in her jacket, having come straight from the stall. She read the first line. She put it down on the counter. She picked it up and read the first line again. She called her mother in Kingston. It was 6 in the morning there. Her mother answered on the second ring because mothers of daughters living abroad develop a special relationship with early calls and answer them always. Me get it, Zara said. A sound came down the phone from Kingston that woke up at least one neighbor and possibly a dog. She stood in her kitchen in Seoul with her jacket still on, the scholarship letter in her hand, and outside the window the city was doing what it did every January morning. Cold, enormous, indifferent, extraordinary. The Han River was out there somewhere beyond the buildings. Itaewon was out there with yard vibes wrapped for the night. The tower in Gangnam was out there. 34 floors of glass and consequence that had tried to remove her from her own story and hadn't managed it. She had a restaurant to open, a scholarship to begin, a husband who had, 3 weeks ago, started seeing a therapist. She knew because he left the apartment on Tuesdays with a different quality of quiet and came back lighter, smaller in some good way, like something had been set down. There was a knock at the door that evening. She knew his knock. She had known it for 3 years, the specific rhythm of it, 2 quick and 1 slow, a habit from when he used to knock on her hostel room door in those first months before they had a shared space. She stood at the door for 30 seconds. She thought about all the things that had happened in this city. The near miss in the rain, the Friday visits, the scarf, the gifts, the recording, the tower, the letter on the counter. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, the way the morning light came through the louver windows. She opened the door. Kwame was standing there with a bunch of flowers that were clearly from the convenience store, yellow chrysanthemums in plastic wrap, and the expression of a man who has practiced what he was going to say and has now, in the actual moment, forgotten all of it. She looked at him for a moment. The flowers are terrible, she said. I know, he said. It was the best the GS-25 had. I got the scholarship, she said. His face did something enormous. He said nothing for a moment. Then, I know, he said. Yuna texted me. She stepped back from the door. Not all the way, not the full, uncomplicated step of everything being resolved, but enough. He came in. The door closed behind him. Seoul went on outside. The Han River ran where it had always run, cold and wide and entirely unbothered. Somewhere in Itaewon, the Yard Vibe sign waited in its cloth wrapping for morning. It would be a good morning.
Hi guys, in this story we learned that no one has the right to decide the size of your life for you. Not the man who loves you possessively, not the man who wants to own you, not the city that was not built for you, not even the version of yourself that failed the first time and almost believed that that was the final answer. Every person in this story tried to make Zara smaller in some way. Kwame through jealousy, Jinhoon through manipulation, circumstances through a scholarship rejection. At 22, she refused all of it. Quietly, strategically, and entirely on her own terms, she did not burn anything down just to keep building until building spoke for itself. Know what belongs to you, your dream, your identity, your voice, your choice, and do not put it down for anyone. Kindly like and subscribe.